This is going to be a conversation with a long-standing member of the Liberalists, the movement founded in the name of Sargon of Akkad, Cole Benjamin. This is a man who's been at the heart of liberalism. He's been at the forefront of the movement, and this is his story. This is his tale. This is his expose of the antics, the shenanigans, the really bizarre things that have been happening in these little circles. Want to start initially with sort of the birth of the liberalist movement. Would you like to furnish the viewer at home with what this is all about?
Of course, of course. And I actually think it is, well, perhaps the thing it has now become has very humble and in many ways very innocent beginnings. For it was on, I believe it was January 4th, 2018, where Andy Wolski, a quite prolific streamer on YouTube, who got also a little bit infamous by essentially saying, hey, look, I will have anyone on my platform and they can debate anything. I will be a moderator. I will be unbiased, as close as possible anyway. And, you know, lo and behold, gradually, two people stepped up to the challenge. One of them being Richard Spencer, of course, a notorious, well, white nationalist, as the media would call it, I'm sure, and maybe even himself, and Sargon of Akkad. There were other figures involved, but these two were they stood center stage. They were the prime actors of this great ballet. And what a ballet it was, for even though these two dancers tiptoed back and forth, you know, one leading the other, you know, sort of with snarky comments here and with, you know, little sort of zingers and gotchas to and fro. Eventually, it became quite clear, as well in the comments as in the discussion itself, that Sargon had a bit trouble, it seemed. That, you know, throughout the years, no matter how many videos about feminists he would make, or about, you know, Muslims, or the social justice warriors, or this and that, I guess you can make an argument for the case that when it comes down to it, making a reply video is very different from having a live debate in which you can't pause every 10 seconds and think of a snarky comment. So Sargon, at least according to many, and also to me, frankly, lost the debate. His arguments were facetious. He was stumbling and stuttering all over himself. He said things which, even to the most unbiased of observers, sounded childish. You know, things like, oh, Richard, what color am I thinking of? If you know everything, what color am I thinking of, Richard? Tell me, Richard, have you even read this book? Because if you have, how can you disagree with me? You know, sort of.
Have you even read Locke?
Have you even read Locke? Richard. These memes have existed. I think that at the heart of every meme is a little grain of truth, and so too, definitely within the Sargonist memes, he was condescending, and at the end of the day, just childish, just immature, just not well read, even on his own positions, let alone those of Richard or anyone else he debated in that stream. Characters like Millennial Woes, or even JF, the other moderator. So the point is that Sargon was, well, honestly, even if you disagree, as a dear viewer, right, as a liberalist viewer, perhaps, hey, nice to meet you, and, you know, welcome. But even if you disagree and you think that Sargon won the debate, you can't deny the fact that Sargon himself felt that he lost. How do we know this?
And it was a very poor performance. As you say, objectively, it was poor.
Yes, but also in Sargon's own mind, I believe, because he left. He said, oh, I'm tired, I have to go off. And then he went to his own channel, he ran away to his little corner, had I believe, a multiple, or rather 1 hour debate with a few of his friends, in which they were discussing the aftermath, which essentially means, in sort of Sargonic speech, licking the proverbial wounds of the great, you know, battle on the Andy Wolski stream.
I'd just like to jump in and just clarify that it doesn't matter if you think that Sargon won or lost. What matters is that Sargon believed he lost. That's what matters. And what matters now is that he ran away, objectively ran away, said that he was tired, said that he was going to bed. Then, you know, an hour stream follows where he's picking over it, he's doing the aftermath, but essentially it's damage control. He's doubling down on his position, and this again, doesn't it? It evolves into him establishing the liberalist movement.
That is exactly right. And he did so on January 9th. So a few days after, sort of, allowing himself to, I guess, calm down and maybe think of a nice little term to use, he made a video titled 2018, What Can We Do? Which is a question, I suppose, he asked both to the audience that will watch this future video, but also to himself. And the answer was unanimous. They will become the liberalists. Because as he argues, if someone who advocates for socialism is a socialist, and someone who advocates for Islam is an Islamist, or Muslim, and someone who advocates for fascism is a fascist, then of course someone who advocates for liberty is a liberalist, essentially. He says
This
he doesn't like it.
took him
Yes.
all of 5 seconds to coin that term, and it's
Of
going to
course.
be forever engraved on Sargon's heart. He's never going to live down liberalistism, is he? It's a nonsense moniker, and it's been proven as such. It's been proven as such by the people who LARP under it.
Indeed. And I think one of the primary reasons this is such a nonsense moniker is because he's tried this time and again, be it with the skepticism movement, which he now will deny being a fervent part of. There's many evidences out there that, he didn't coin the term, but he took it upon himself, again, like this mantle. And you can see this being a repeating pattern with Sargon, that whenever he takes a fancy title for himself, when it becomes less popular, or again, the Kakistani stuff is a fairly decent example as well. He will gradually sort of disempower it and then deconstruct it before taking up another one. But my point is that although he originally was looking for just the term liberal, or classical liberal perhaps would be more accurate for Sargon, at least I'm sure he would think so, he thinks that the term liberal has been too vilified in today's society, particularly because of the things that actual liberals do. So to sort of create a gap between an association with, with liberals, he made a weird distinction by arguing that the suffix of ist, ist, refers to something that is an advocate of a particular concept or ideology. So no, he's not a liberal. He is a liberalist because he is someone who advocates for liberalism. That's a weird distinction you can only make by a technicality, frankly. I mean, liberals advocate for liberalism as well. It is sheer nonsense, of course, but this is a very good microcosm and a good example of the little technicalities and indeed sort of idiosyncrasies that Sargon and his subsequent followers, after he made this video on January 9th, will be consumed by. For indeed, the rabbit hole we are about to traverse goes very, very deep and very, very quickly as well, for there's quite a steep slope.
So what happens after Sargon creates the movement, establishes liberalistism, makes up the term, coins what these people are going to be LARPing under? What then happens? What action is then taken by the boots on the ground?
I think that it became very quickly evident that on multiple fronts there were advances being made. Sargon himself, very quickly, a few days after, purchased a domain, liberalist.org, I believe, is the exact URL, on which he outlined a set of basic principles. And when I say basic, I do mean that these are the, honestly, just the very fundamental qualities of, I would dare say, any political ideology that isn't a fringe, or maybe not fascism or communism or something like, I don't know, anarcho-monarchism, but aside from that, this is mainstream stuff. He's talking about secularism. He's talking about freedom of speech. He's talking about meritocracy.
Nothing there that's anywhere near outside the realms of vanilla, anywhere. It's very bland, it's very safe. That was my impression of the FAQ.
Oh, indeed. If you imagine the proverbial Overton window, then this thing is the glass that holds the window together. It is completely at the center, which is something I think Sargon would quite like, of course, but you are quite right. There's nothing revolutionary in here, either in thought or indeed in principle. Nothing. These are all very basic, very conservative, and I don't mean right-wing, but just in the original sense of the word, just very conservative, very mainstream ideas.
But I also thought that it was very thin and loose to hang something like a whole new political movement off of. I thought it was a very weak framework from which to rally an army, as it were.
It seems that maybe the dislike for the unlike, in this case being the alt-right and, Richard Spencer, sort of the faction in the internet and the political spheres which have been gaining some traction in recent years. I think it is maybe a common cause that led them together more than anything, and that Sargon was just a crucible, the excuse that provided many of these dissident factions and individuals of the internet to band together under his banner. Because as soon as he published these principles, a Reddit subreddit was founded as well. Multiple, I believe, but one has sort of emerged as the primary. I believe it is simply called R Liberalist. And similarly to that, there's also been numerous YouTube personalities of admittedly shorter stature than Sargon, but still relatively significant in their own sense. People like V, like Louis Leveau, like...
Let's just talk about V for a second. Can we give a brief outline of V?
Oh,
There's
yes.
a lot of stuff that's come out recently about V's online past, his history, before getting into all of this. That's been very enlightening, very funny, but very enlightening on the type of person we're talking about here.
Well, I think there doesn't need to be, well, there's not a lot to be said, honestly, which is probably the greatest mercy I can bestow upon V at this point. He is a Romanian cannibal, or perhaps it's a strong word, let's say, so a very enthusiastic vor fetishist, and I am... Well, let's just say if you don't know what that means, I consider you very fortunate. Please don't look it up. But he is the archetypical current year political pundit, in the sense that he got into politics not because of any great social issue, not because of any anything to do with, let's say, diplomatic matters or military matters or even the economy. Nothing even to do with ideology or religion, perhaps. No. He got into politics, more or less, seriously engaged himself because of his sacred recreational activities, his video games. And now look, I'm not here to say that these things are bad or even degenerate or this and that. Everyone has their spare time and everyone can spend it, relatively how they like. But ultimately, it does speak to his character, does it not? And this is a trend you can see in many of these figures among the liberalist movement.
Well, let alone Sargon of Akkad himself.
Indeed, he is gone with it, yes.
He was motivated into activism simply by Anita Sarkeesian criticizing his video games. I think when you are incentivized to action because your own hedonism is under threat, then that says a lot about how far in the mud, in the mire you've become. And I think that you should recognize that stuff like Gamergate inciting you into action was a very, very trivial, minor thing. Yet a lot of these people mythologize Gamergate. This is their year zero. This is their 9/11. This is their Battle of Waterloo. This is what they're going to forever remember. This is what brought them into the battle. It's their Pearl Harbor. They don't have any perspective on these matters. Yet V and Sargon both came into... well, I know that Sargon himself has said that he wasn't really a political animal, even slightly before Gamergate, before Anita Sarkeesian. And I think if Anita Sarkeesian is responsible, really, for what the liberalist thing is, when the book is written on liberalistism, when the MP is in Parliament and they're writing the manifesto and they have to do the origins of where it's all from, the origins of Sargon of Akkad, and they have to point to a video game being criticized by a feminist, then I think that puts into perspective just how silly this all is.
Indeed, and that really cuts to the heart of the issue. For it was the video games, the recreational activities, that symbolized the bridge too far. And you can see that all the principles of the liberalist movement derived since, the occurrence that was Gamergate, really color their view. And it does so in a very, let's say, contradictory light, because although they claim to be for individuality and free speech and democracy and freedom of this and freedom of that and blind justice for all, it all derives from the true issue at their hearts, which informs the core fundamental values which they truly care about, which is themselves, of course. And I don't mean themselves as individuals, but themselves as hedonists. You know, their ability to be pleasured and to give pleasure and to maintain in a state of pleasure. And because of this, you will quickly find, as we get into these principles and need the little characters at play here, that tactical nihilism, rampant hedonism, sexual deviancy in the degenery, and also lackluster moral character are the very building blocks which comprise the actors upon this stage that is the liberalist play.
I want you to just furnish us with the character backgrounds, the characters even, that inhabit this play, inhabit the stage, are movers and shakers in the liberalist movement. What are they doing?
Well, I think the best place to start, and indeed perhaps the only place I'm really qualified to talk about, for I know that there's a Facebook out there which is being raided on the regular by the alt-right. I myself have opted for a more personal look. Indeed, I have taken the long flowing trench coat upon myself, you know, the little noir hat, the trilby, I believe it's how it's colloquially called, and have lobbed as a 1920s detective, really getting into the nitty-gritty and walking among the liberalist, populist, indeed, scurrying in their back alleys, digging through their trash, and boy, let me tell you, there is a lot of dirty laundry to shift through here. And the Discord particularly, I also read it in parts, but the Discord particularly is where I have made my bed. And what a festering bed of degeneracy it is, my friends, for it is run by a figure who is, again, like the archetypical liberalist, truly a living contradiction. A boy rather, who goes by Nicholas. He's a Dane, indeed. Quite proud of so, because his profile picture is essentially just a Danish flag, which should tell you something about his lackluster personality. I've nothing against Danes, but this one particularly, oh yes, of course.
And what's this fellow like? What's he doing in this Discord? What's his role? How is he organizing the troops?
Well, as the server owner and indeed the head moderator, he loves, and I mean he adores, to micromanage. Indeed, when called out upon it, and when confronted by the fact that he may not be the most principled of man, or that he constantly breaks the rules that he set out for the rest of the server, he will tell you, to your face, moderators are allowed to break the rules, because we are the first among equals. Indeed, how anyone can say this with a straight face, indeed bordering on smug satisfaction, you know, sort of holding in your breath for a chuckle, is beyond me. Of course, if this were a communist server, maybe it could be understood. A fascist server, even. Of course, again, entirely understandable. But for a liberalist server, these people who preach about individual rights, about freedom of speech, about blind justice, and all this and that, division of power, decentralization, he is a character from Oliver Twist. He is a parody, someone who is larger than life, who loves to micromanage to and fro, and to impose really idiocentric rules upon essentially everyone and anyone he can get away with.
What drew him to liberalistism? What drew him to the liberalists? Is his devotion to Sargon of Akkad so undying? When did it start? How does he have any connection to Sargon?
I believe, as far as I know, that a connection to Sargon, the stepfather, of course, works in mysterious ways. So his involvement cannot be ascertained. But V, indeed, does give him some marching orders. And it is precisely because of this attention and because of the ability to act as the proverbial stick in this play, he has become a liberalist. He loves to LARP as a armchair commissar. Indeed, when many people will be talking in the chats or having discussions, he will drop in, talk over people, force them to, to cut the chatter essentially, because he's something important to say. And then he talks, of course, about the true liberalist principle, video games, right? Or something equally as bemusing, let's say. But this character although he is the facilitator of the Discord, is far from the most grievous, and indeed even the most controversial. For he does take a bit of a back seat, not in his moderation, mind you, but in display of characters. Indeed, I have luckily not had the displeasure of having a lot of interaction with him, and I would like to keep it that way. But when we look at the moderation team in general, which was all people who have gained a position by sucking up to him directly, and therefore to the, let's say, the liberalist image, one of them in particular was a female, a woman. And as we all know, since this movement derived itself from the Atheism Plus community, the Skeptic community, the Kakistani community, females are a dime a dozen in these sort of places. At least you'd assume so. So, of course, considering her picture, which is not your typical animal profile picture or Danish flag, it was a picture of a cleavage, essentially, a set of mammary glands, which didn't intrigue me, of course, I am sorry to admit. And then when I searched for her name, which was just an ordinary female name, it was a bit of a Bambi Lamb, I believe, maybe a bit eccentric, but again, still an ordinary name. I found on the very first page of the Googles something that was a bit perturbed. An escort service based in Ontario, Canada, of course. Transgender escort service, excuse me. Which was the very same person.
Of course.
Indeed, when confronted with this, neither she, or he, or it, what have you, nor the other moderators, well, seemed to deny it, first off. In fact, they confirmed it. And then they were very quick to tell me that they didn't care. Why?
Well, because she made... They weren't taught right.
Well, they made...
They are not bigots.
She made good arguments on the Facebook, or so I was told. And therefore, she became a moderator in the Discord.
Do you think that her promotion to moderator had anything to do with her gender, or its gender, or their gender?
I am sure it may have been a factor. But honestly, these people may well be deluded enough to think that it is good optics. Indeed, does it not strike you so in the current year? To have one of their ilk among your ranks as moderators, it is very progressive. I think we can all agree. It is very hip to do so.
Progressive in what sense? I mean, what's the makeup racially of this group?
Do you just mean the moderation team or the entire...
It's homogenous white. I assume there's very few blacks. There's very few...
In my weeks of being here, and I've had many hours of many debates, and indeed have listened to many a layman tell me about this or that issue. They talk of Indian reservation rights, about communism, about child pornography. But I can assure you that I've not yet found anyone who was not white. Although I'll swallow those words. There's been one Brazilian, who I assume is not white. But you will be most right, my friends. A large conclave, a cascade even, a cacophony, other words are started to see, to really encompass this large well, essentially an ethno-state and an ethno-discord is what I'm trying to put across here. Of largely European descent.
What you're saying is that the liberalist discord, that liberalistism itself, is the last bastion of white identity.
Indeed, I think that Spencer should swallow his words in this case, and I'm sure he would love to. That's a guy swallows a whole lot on a daily basis. For liberalism is, I think, perhaps the most implicitly white, or not implicitly, intrinsically white movement we've seen so far. Indeed, even the alt-right counts many blacks and even Jews or half-Jews among their rank, and I have not seen anyone, or again, rather, I've not seen more than a handful, by which I mean 3 or so, people who were non-whites in the liberalist community so far.
What of the other members of the moderation team?
Well, you see, when I first joined this Discord, which is when I was sort of initially founded a few weeks ago, again, we have to understand that this movement is so young and new that every day is equivalent to a month's time. Everything goes at a rapid pace. Every moderator that exists now was just an ordinary member back then. And they became moderators simply by sucking up. There's no, I'm not going to put a finer point to it. I'm not going to entertain you with purple prose either. They sucked up. In fact, I have been a personal witness to the times where this Dane, this Nicholas, I've spoken before, he will jump on a voice chat, and of course he quiets everyone down. In fact, he will kick or mute you if you don't, when he wants to talk about his video games or ask for advice about how to, I'm not sure, do something in some sort of weird MMO, until such a time as people essentially fillet him enough to the point where they become moderators. First lower moderators and then full moderators. You have to understand that there is an, although they claim to be individualist and that everyone is equal, of course, there's a very firm hierarchy.
The hierarchy of the moderation group. It's very interesting in the sense that you say that they are the liberalists themselves are a collection of individuals, yet they have this very firm hierarchy, and they bootlick almost as much as the enemies that they claim to be against. They hate the alt-right, they hate the extremes, they hate the ends of the horseshoe, yet they seem to act and behave in a manner far worse than either side.
Indeed they do. In fact, I would go as far as to say that they are the epitome of this sort of behavior, at least as it stands currently. For even within the alt-right, people like Spencer or Jared Taylor or Mike Enoch or any of these figureheads routinely get called derogatory names, well, derogatory within the context of the alt-right, shall we say. They are accused of being Semitic, of being partly Negroid in nature, of being cuckolds, and so on and so forth. Even if half-jokingly, these points are raised, whether you believe they are valid or not from an alt-right perspective. Criticism is levied. But within the liberalists, be it on a Discord or indeed to the true figureheads like V, Louis, or Sargon himself, no such thing happens, at least not beyond the superficial. For maybe a joke here and there, such talk is very quickly and very systematically and harshly stifled by, indeed, be the head moderator himself or his posse of bootlicks. For these people, you have to understand, my friends, have taken this LARP, this Sargonic meme, entirely made up simply because he lost the debate with Richard Spencer and wanted to give himself a subsequent excuse to appear to seem busy so he didn't have to do a rematch. These people take it very, very seriously. I mean, to the point where even one of these, a Belgian, wants to come to my country in order to counter-protest Antifa. Of course, I'm not a proponent of Antifa. In fact, I would rather see them all 6 feet under, but that doesn't change the fact that I also would not like, well, let's say I have a hard time deciding between what's worse, Antifa on my streets or liberalists. I'll put it that much. Both are undoubtedly equally as annoying, and they probably smell equally as bad as well. But I digress.
It seems as though the liberalist is the Charizard to the Kekistani Charmeleon, or perhaps the Metapod to the Kekistani Caterpie.
An interesting analogy.
Very definite line between Kekistan and what we're seeing now. A very definite line.
Yes, and a bit of an ironic line as well, if you permit the phrase, for Kekistan was founded as a, well, ironic joke, just a joke by Sargon to take the piss out of the alt-right, which then sort of took a life on its own, at which point he slowly but surely distanced himself from it, and subsequently Kekistan has died as any real quote-unquote movement. Whereas this is the opposite. In an attempt to counter, not just troll, but counter the alt-right, he wanted to make a serious political movement, which has, much like Kekistan, of course, this sort of Sargonic circle he can't escape, it has evolved into a joke. Indeed, even from the very first day of the Discord going up, from the Reddit being launched, from the Facebook group being made, people have been streaming in, be it like myself, who are just interested parties, shall we say, or genuine alt-right partisans, and it has been a shitstorm. Indeed, a shitstorm of such proportions that the Discord had to make very quick, very decisive policy changes, which I can only admit to being, well, let's say, just ironic again. It's a phrase that gets repeated time and time again when discussing liberalists, because they are just walking contradictions. For a movement based upon individual liberty and, rights, blind justice, and all this and that, against collectivism. The very moment I came in there with a dedicated friend, and we started to meme a bit. Nothing grievous. In fact, honestly, something completely innocent. We called ourselves Sargonists. A bit tongue-in-cheek, of course, I admit, but we proclaimed ourselves to be adherent worshippers of Sargon. Sure, perhaps you could consider us to be a bit of a harsh reflection of the liberalist himself, but certainly nothing in bad taste, and certainly nothing vulgar. But these people, particularly the moderators at the time, would not stand for it. No, we were banned. Every threat, or rather every voice channel, was moderated around the clock for the 2 days that we did this little joke. And what happens when I rejoin on an alternate account? A draconian set of Byzantine rules that will make, I'm not even sure, that will make a Soviet commissar blush with envy, red with envy indeed, for a systematic hierarchy of ranks, of titles, of security clearances, of access channels, and indeed even of hierarchies within the moderation team themselves have appeared.
One of those moderators which we haven't touched upon yet is a fellow Englishman. He's an Englishman that owns a crossbow, who apparently has a substantial amount of capital in order to fund the very first Liberalist MP. Would you like to detail that, please?
Indeed, a figure by the name of Catching Smoke on the Discord has gone on record and indeed appears to boast about his massive funds, which is all fun and well, of course, but whenever he brings this up, he is sure to follow with how he well, it just seems ecstatic. He can't wait for the opportunity to bankroll on his own and personally any number of politicians within the British houses for the quote-unquote liberalist cause, be it MPs, be it within the local elections. And indeed, he has even, sort of jokingly, over a glass of what I can only assume to be the most expensive of wine, has waxed philosophically about how coy it would be to buy up some local newspapers, or rather, the pockets of the editors, rather, and to publish a story, or let's say before a local general election, with one of the major candidates dying. Something like rest in peace, Jeremy Corbyn, or such and such, in order to subtly influence the election. Of course, he thinks he's being quite coy and a little bit cheeky with this. However, in actuality, it becomes quite clear that he, much like various people within the server, are LARPing as armchair politicians, as the, let's say, liberalist George Soroses of the movement, and the people with enough money and indeed enough influence to throw around to like to pretend like the world runs in their little circles and is wrapped around their little pinky finger. But ultimately, he is too, much like the moderators, they are bare reflections of the populace of the greater Discord at large.
Do they want Sargon, Cole Benjamin, to run as an MP, as a Member of Parliament?
I think that, aside from their individual feelings, which some might, indeed, some might actually want that, ultimately, they would not dare go against the, let's say, the faux principles that they've set up, because on one hand, well, an MP, Sargon as MP, would be beautiful. I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, they would concede that they mere, low-life, bottom-feeder maggots like themselves, they could never ask Sargon, they could never peer pressure Sargon of a car to do something like that. No. Sargon is beyond reproach. For although they will insist endlessly that he is not the leader, that he has no influence, that he is simply the inspiration of the movement, but not the helmsman, ultimately, at the end of the day, they follow his every motion, and they hang at the lips, and they hang at his lips, following every word that he says.
Just how much interaction have these people actually had with Sargon? Have any of them met him in real life? Have any of them spoken to him over the internet? Have any of them had any meaningful interaction with him beyond thumbing up his videos and commenting on them?
A handful of them have indeed. Primarily, again, among the moderation team, a particular trend is that a fair few of their number have met Sargon in real life.
They've touched the hand of Jesus.
Indeed, indeed, they have kissed the ring of the stepfather, if you will, and with this oath of fealty, indeed, perhaps a blood oath involved as well, though I can't confirm that. Again, we have to take a step back and really remember that for all the talk of individualism, of meritocracy, of first come, first serve, in the end, it is painfully clear that the favor of Sargon can make or break you within the liberalist movement. And this thing, this entire ideology is more akin to a cult of personality, than it is a true forum, a auditorium for free thoughts and ideas to be exchanged between truly individualistic individuals.
Well, what actions are being made, are being taken in this Discord to affect liberalistism as a movement outside of the internet, in the real world? What plans are being drawn? What action is to be taken?
Again, this is something, much like the Reddit, the Facebook, and the Discord, it is a multi-pronged approach. On one hand, we have the people like Catching Smoke, the armchair politicians who like to lob as George Soros and talk about funding this or that, or buying publishing companies up and making them print out shirts or flyers and leaflets and this and that. Negotiating with local MPs and sending emails to figures like Nigel Farage, or indeed maybe even Her Majesty, to elicit a response. On the other hand, there are moderators and let's say his hanger-ons like Rembo, a Belgian who unironically wishes to go out there into the streets, indeed even trespass into foreign countries for political reasons, to march the pavements and to hand out flyers like it's the high 1870s. We have the paper boys who are going to tell us the good word about this and that prolific figure preaching so and so on about your social rights and how you're being oppressed because you're not individualistic enough. And then on the other spectrum, we have certain figures who want to do this all digitized. They basically want to become the alt-right, but a more leftist, center-leftist version of it. They want to dominate the Twitterverses. They want to make YouTube videos, and indeed, they have a contest for spicy memes. And of course, what movement will be complete without a logo? The alt-right doesn't have one. Technically, well, the alt-left, if you can even call it such a thing, doesn't, although Antifa does. But these people have been quite passionate for many weeks now. Although I guess on one hand also a bit indecisive, now that I think of it, on discussing a logo. And that is really the crux of what I want to really communicate to the viewer here. There is a bit of a contradiction. Again, a movement founded upon contradictions. There's one more to add. A lot of people take this thing very seriously. They see it as the legitimate foundation for a true political party, be it in Britain, be it in America, be it in whatever Western state you can think of. Then again, a lot of other people see it as merely an internet thing. Again, more like the alt-right, sort of a mass of ideas and disembodied voices, sort of commenting and trying to shift the online Overton window. Whereas others, just see it as a place of discussion, there's some place to refine your ideas and to have some bands, but nothing more. And like I said,
one does not,
yes.
but one in this Discord server does not move individually. The way I have come to understand their decision-making process, things are by committee, by lots of committee, by committees upon committees upon committees. Can you establish what I mean when I talk about this?
Of course, and not to my own horn, but it all comes back to me and a certain friend of mine. Again, when the Discord was very young, and when the liberalists themselves were very naive, and perhaps even genuinely believed in the ideas that they were preaching, I came in there, and I larped a bit as a religious Sargonite, and I, honestly, to paraphrase Trump a bit, I did a great job. I had the best bands. People flocked to me like I was a jar of absolute nectar. I had 10, 20, 30 converts, people I've never even heard of. They started changing their names into these sort of play on words. They'd call themselves things like Sargonic Inquisition, or Templari Sargoni, or the voice of Sargon, all these sort of things. And they flooded the chats. They spammed pictures of Sargonic Holy OC. It was the birthplace of esoteric Sargonism in its truest form. Indeed, we've even written manifestos. We've had sermons. We've had great battles with people LARPing as Richard Spencer as a sort of foil to us. It was the Wild West. It was a he will not divide us sort of level of artistic entertainment entirely produced for and by just memers like ourselves. Indeed, at the end, we even managed a book club. What more would you want from this? But like all such things, they come to an end. For when the moderators heard of this, I got banned, and so did a few others. Changes are made, as I said, draconian laws were put in place. And this is the precise point in time where these liberalists, the unironic liberalists, which admittedly are maybe a handful of people among hundreds, all of them moderators, coincidentally, they changed their minds. They rid themselves of the naivety and indeed adopted a stance that everyone and everything that comes in, you are guilty until proven innocent, essentially. You are alt-right, you are a troll, you are a Nazi, you are a meme, whatever word or prerogative they like to use. And because of this, they argue, draconian laws had to be put in place. There had to be security clearances, there had to be multiple levels of moderation and indeed rules and rooms that you can only access, and you can only even talk with certain people depending on your own level of ideological purity. These are the levels of draconianism we are talking about. And then it seems that a few hours ago, from the time of this interview, indeed, it may well be a few days after you actually hear this, listeners, but there was a stream, the latest among many, of the great liberalist moderators. They all came together from the Facebook sphere, from the Reddit sphere, from the Discord sphere, obviously. And about 20 of them or so were discussing their new policy. And indeed, like you brought up, my friend, committees. That is the new liberalist word of the day, of the morning dawn, of the rising sun. It is committee, committee, committee. It is collective. It is task force. It is group. For what previously this was a sort of libertarian-esque movement, I mean, in the sense of free speech, free association, meritocracy, now it has evolved into something that, again, would make a Soviet commissar blush with envy. They want, in fact, they are planning and already working on a set of committees, of organizations, and of task forces, which will relegate and indeed control everything, from the minute to the grandiose, from the localized to the universal, be it a committee for public relations, which determines what words you can or cannot use on the internet. For, as someone pointed out, the word cuck was an alt-right term, so we can't use that. And the word normie was too offensive, so that one is out of the book as well. Public relations, a committee for the design of a logo, a committee of resource distribution, which I presume is a fancy word for people who make really shitty memes. This and more, of course, all coming to the head of a leadership committee, a sort of council, as the head moderator put it best, or first among equals, who will dictate policy going forward.
When do they plan on getting Sargon in the Discord server? Is Sargon even going to enter, do we think? Do we believe that Sargon is actually going to join his troops?
Personally, to be very honest, I think Sargon is being conflicted. On one hand, he would like to pretend to be principled, and indeed, his ego is a very big thing, and therefore also very fragile. It is like a proverbial balloon. It looks large and imposing and humongous, but it is very easily pricked and inflated as a result. So while I have no doubt that Sargon on one hand wishes to distance himself with this cringy movement, again, it's only been out for 2 weeks and it's already become the laughing stock of the entire internet, he wishes to distance himself from it. I believe this earnestly, just like he did with the skeptics and the Kakistanis. But of course, a larger part of him, at least at the moment, I believe, feels like he has to stick to his guns. So this is his moment at the Alamo, right? This is his hill to die on. So for now, I believe he will take a bit of a hands-off approach and, like the stepfather does best, work through his intermediaries, through people like V or Louis, or indeed whoever is in contact with the various moderators of the Facebooks, Reddit pages and Discord groups. So will he enter personally? I doubt it, indeed. So although he may receive the offer, I truly doubt that he will involve himself any more than he will have to. And indeed, I think that at the end of the day, his, let's say, I don't want to say reason particularly, but his shame will win out over his stubborn pride, and he will distance himself from the liberalist movement, just like he has the Kakastanis and just like he has the skeptics.
And what do you think will become of the people left? These liberalists, these people inhabiting this Discord server, where will their movement go?
Well, I think it's quite ironic, but their movement is entirely predicated upon Sargon. For although they may like to confuse them, or rather convince themselves that they are individualists and that they are revolutionaries and that they are being very controversial in what they're saying, they're not. All their principles, you can look them up yourself. At first there was, I believe, 10 or so of them, but they've been subsequently hamstringed, as Sargon was continuously pointed to the inherent contradictions between many of them, such as freedom of association, also meaning that freedom to disassociate, which is not something he liked. The principles by which they operate are so hollow and void, so universal, so basic bitch, that anyone truly, except for the most diehard of fascists or communists, would agree with them. Things like secularism, okay, I suppose theocrats as well as the third group there, but things like secularism or economic freedom, or that democracy, just generally, is a good thing. Again, these people are not unique, they're not edgy, they are not revolutionary, they are not even mind-breaking. They are the glass pane of the Overton window, and they can never move. And for that reason, when Sargon does decide to pull the proverbial plug, I believe that there will be hangers-on, of course, who will try to make their own. But in the end, I think they will sort of look for an excuse, not to anyone else, but to themselves, to keep their shallow prides intact, and to then gently, when time allows it, drift away, and just become the thing that they always were, which is just an ordinary, not a liberalist, just a liberal.
Tell me about the structure of the Liberalist Party, what these fellows in this Discord server have envisioned about the real-life organization of the party.
Well, indeed, it's actually very good you bring it up, my friend, because as mentioned, although the lines are sort of blurred in, which people take it seriously and to what degree they take it seriously, and, be it online or in real life, the small but very vocal camp of people who truly and genuinely believe this to be, the next up-and-coming political party that's going to be fielding a number of chess pieces in the House of Commons in the upcoming years, have created something called the party structure. Indeed, they refer to themselves as, although I believe it is a placeholder name, indeed I hope so, for the sense of their shame, International Board of Liberalists. International Board of Liberalists, the IBL, of course. We have to have an anagram in there, or an acronym, excuse me, which will be headed by the president. Presidential system, very beautiful, and flanked by both the National Committee, but also the Master of Controversial Questions. Master of Controversial Questions. I'm not sure if I'm looking at, well, I'm sure like a weirdly translated Japanese RPG, or indeed the the fundamental structure of a party. But either way, a very, very interesting position to have nonetheless, and I assume very needed for something like the liberalist movement, for they still, these poor souls, haven't figured out what white actually is. Controversial questions indeed. And then, as ministers of the party, there will be a secretary to the party, not of the party, but a secretary to the party, a treasurer, of course, a vice president, an honorary Sargon. I'm not sure if this is an attempt at humor, or at least, again, at this point, it may well be unironic, which I am very, very ashamed to say. It's quite sad. and a head of public relations, because you have to worry about those optics. Even though your movement is already a shitty meme 2 weeks on, 2 weeks in, maybe you can still salvage it. Maybe. It seems that, as we quickly run through this, the responsibilities and powers of each member, the president, which is elected by majority vote of the party as a 4-year term. So they're clearly modeling it after the American system here. And the president has the responsibilities and powers to sign and veto proposals from the National Committee, to authorize spending of party funds, to appoint honorary member, head of public relations, and all the other ministers, to create additional cabinet positions as necessary, to give a state of the party address once a year, to reprimand national parties for violating the principles of liberalism, of course, so he's also a bit of adjudicator in this sense, to confirm or veto elections of master of controversial questions and treasurer, and essentially just a large tard wrangler. Excuse my terminology. A large, or rather, he is the high moderator. This political party is essentially just the model of the Discord server, copy-pasted into real life.
It's a massive LARP. This is a LARP in the most quintessential terms. This is LARPing in its most distilled form. This is just one big LARP, 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 LARP.